Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us. My name is Michelle Moser. I own Maker's Compounding Pharmacy, and I wanted to bring this information to you this evening because this is the FDA Veterinary Guidance number 256, and it can significantly impact veterinary offices, but many veterinarians have had questions about this as they've heard about it, but they weren't quite sure how it would impact them or their ability to call in compounded prescriptions. So hopefully we'll get most of those questions answered tonight, but clearly if you have any questions whatsoever, please type those in the chat and we will answer those as they go. So thanks again for joining us. So the bottom line is yes, you can still prescribe compounds. There is absolutely nothing illegal about that. It is absolutely legal to compound veterinary prescriptions. The FDA acknowledges that compounding is necessary in the veterinary world because clearly if you've got a canine and you have a 140-pound canine, that's going to be a little bit different dose than if it's the same medication for a 5-pound canine. So we need to make sure that dosing is available to take care of all of our veterinarian clients and patients. Our fur friends are incredibly important to us, and we want to make sure that they're well cared for. Compounding pharmacy will assess when a compound needs to be made from bulk active ingredients versus FDA finished products. And I'm going to go through a couple of examples of that tonight as well. This guidance won't be enforced until potentially October 2022 or beyond. We know that there's still some questions about exactly what does that mean. So we wanted to bring the information to you as soon as possible so that if questions come up, they can be answered. But we want to make sure that we are prepared so that we can be making sure that we're taking care of all of those guidelines and ensuring that things are proper on your end as well. So this guidance is specifically to compounding for animal drugs from bulk drug substances, also known as active pharmaceutical ingredients, or what we lovingly call APIs. But this is only under the direct supervision of a veterinarian or a pharmacist in a state licensed pharmacy or federal facility operated by the federal government. This guidance doesn't apply to animal compounded for use in investigational or new animal drugs, or to animal drugs compounded from FDA animal or human drugs, which are considered legal extra label uses of such drugs. So this guidance specifically goes over the use of or compounding from active ingredients. And we'll actually talk about some of the exceptions to that. So this guidance was actually finalized in April of 22. It was originally proposed approximately 7-8 years ago, maybe even 9 years ago, but the way it was written, it was fairly vague and it really only applied to human compounding. However, at this time, the FDA generally does not intend to take enforcement action against the compounding of animal drugs from bulk substances for any non-food producing animal for violation of requirements of animal drug approval, adequate direction for use, or the CGMP, which is the Compounded General Manufacturing Compliance Platform, when all of the circumstances that I will now present are met. So number one, a drug has to be compounded under the direct supervision of either a veterinarian or a pharmacist in a state licensed or federal facility. So we know that a lot of veterinarians do compound in their office. And if the licensed veterinarian is there, then that can still happen. But these rules not only apply to compounding pharmacies, but also to veterinarians. So that's why I felt it was very important to bring this information to you. A drug needs to be fully compliant with state and federal regulations, whichever is more strict. So in the state of Washington, we allow for compounding for office use under HR 1850, I believe it is. However, the federal law does not allow us to compound for office use. And that can be applicable to veterinary compounding as well. And we'll get into that a little bit in just a second. So the third guideline in this, or the third bullet point in this guideline, is that all bulk substances, active or inactive, and finished drug products used in compounding must meet the standards set in any applicable USP NF monograph and comply with other FD&C Act requirements for drug components. So that's not a problem, because whether we're using bulk substances that are active ingredients or inactive ingredients, we make sure that they have USP NF monographs and USP NF drug monographs. We make sure of it. And we make sure of that because of the wholesalers that we use to purchase our products from. And that is applicable not just for veterinary compounding, but for human compounding as well. So the fourth bullet point is the dispensing of prescriptions. A drug must be dispensed at the pharmacy after the receipt of a prescription for a specific patient from the veterinarian acting within a valid veterinary care patient relationship, directly to the prescribing veterinarian or to the patient's owner or caretaker. So this refers to the patient triad, and that is applicable for human compounding as well, that there is a relationship between the veterinarian, the client, and the pharmacy, and that a patient-specific prescription is then written for that medication. The subset of that is the veterinarian to the owner or caretaker of a patient in his or her practice, or to another veterinarian in his or her practice located in the same physical location. The enforcement discretion policy described in this guidance does not apply to compounded drugs that are dispensed or transferred to a third party, such as a distributor or retailer, or by a pharmacy to a veterinarian who did not write the prescription. So this, again, is just clarifying that the patient triad between the veterinarian, the patient, and the pharmacist must be kept intact. So the fifth bullet point here is the compounded drug is not a copy of a marketed FDA approved or indexed drug. Or if it is a copy, there's a significant difference between the compounded drug and the FDA approved drug or indexed drug that will produce a clinical difference in the identified patient as determined by the treating veterinarian. So in other words, if we're going to compound something that is already commercially available, there are some stipulations that allow us to do that. And there are some stipulations that allow us to not do that. So we can compound a copy of a commercially available product with the same active ingredient, as long as the route of administration is similar and that there's a clinical difference. And that primarily means the strength to the volume, or perhaps even the dosage form, whether it's available in an oral form and now we're going to make a transdermal product, or if the medication is too weak of a concentration, for example, 1 milligram per mil, and the animal requires 300 milligrams, that's usually that volume is prohibitive to administer to the animal. So concentration can be changed for that. We also need to take a look at flavoring, because in the veterinary world, the flavoring can literally be the difference between administering a medication to that pet and that pet not taking the medication. A lot of human drugs that are commercially available are flavored with mint or sweeteners that maybe are not compatible with that species, or perhaps are not compatible with that animal taking the medication. For example, most cats won't take anything that's cherry or banana. However, if we flavor it creamy chicken and concentrate it into a very small volume, perhaps that feline will then accept that medication. However, we cannot compound just because it is less expensive. So if we are compounding a copy of a medication, the rationale cannot be done just because it's cheaper or because the veterinarian wants it that way. There are going to be some guidelines specifically as to how we have to justify this rationale, and that is what we'll also go over. Another exception to allowing us to compound from bulk ingredients is if the patient is allergic to an ingredient in an approved product. And that justification has to be noted not only in the patient's veterinary chart, also in the pharmacy profile and on the prescription. Sometimes it's not necessarily a true allergy, but it can also be an intolerance. So let's take a look at prednisolone. So we use prednisolone a lot for cats. However, the commercially available product has 5% alcohol and is flavored with mint. Most of the time, felines are going to reject that, and most of the time, we don't want alcohol in a feline oral solution. So in this situation, it would be absolutely appropriate to compound that with the justification that the commercially available product contained alcohol and it was flavored inconsistent with that patient being able to accept it. And in some situations, there might be an ingredient that will be toxic to that species. So for example, there are a lot of commercially available tablets that are manufactured that contain lactose as well as sugars. Well, there's a lot of species that cannot handle sugars or cannot handle certain non-active excipients. So in that situation, we would simply put a notation on the prescription as well as the patient profile in the pharmacy. And then the veterinarian would do the same to make sure that everything was consistent. The other thing too is that when we are dealing with FDA approved commercially available products, the list of the inactive ingredients is usually in the package insert, whereas a lot of times veterinary medicines do not list the inactive ingredients. And so it's kind of a guess. But a lot of times those inactive ingredients can be the difference between being able to make a product really well and not being able to make a product really well. And we're actually going to show you a couple of examples of that tonight. The other thing is, whether we're dealing with sugars or lactose, sometimes it's even a dye that's harmful to that animal. And we just want to make sure that we're taking care of these species as best as possible. That's what you want for your patient clients. That's what we want as well. Sometimes the patient will require too many tablets of an approved product just because of what the commercially available product is dosed in. So we can often concentrate things, concentrate prescription medications so that we can put that into a very small volume to be able to administer to a cat or to a small dog, because we certainly don't want to overwhelm them in their mouth cavity, because a lot of times they can, as you well know, they can flip their tongue up or they can kind of gurgle and regurgitate that, and that's not helpful. And the poor owner is then left very frustrated, and we don't want their relationship with their pet to decline. We're here to help enhance that, not break that down. However, the FDA does mention that they are not intending to question the veterinarian's determination for the patient need of a of a compounded medication, as long as it is justified in the veterinary chart, it's on the patient prescription, and also in the pharmacy profile. With the exception of that, we have to be very careful about specific situations, such as we cannot use the notation of the veterinarian just prefers it to be compound, or that it is less expensive. So those are the two main issues that we cannot use, but we can use many, many others. And as we go through this presentation, I'm going to show you some of the ways that we're going to be able to do this. We also want to note that sometimes a patient cannot be safely pilled. As you well know, capsules can be very large, or pills can be very large, and sometimes even the erosion of the esophagus is a problem. Sometimes even just getting a pill in an animal is very difficult because the drug is bitter or because it's just too large of a dosage form. That's where compounded medications often are the solution to these problems, because we can make sure that they are flavored appropriately and that we can block that bitterness and get that medication into the animal. And a lot of times that is the difference between the health of an animal and the illness of an animal. And as I stated before, sometimes oral medications contain alcohol, and that's not something we want to do. But in using the commercially available products to make compounded medications, that's not always easy either, because of the inactive ingredients that they contain. So what we can do for the ease of prescribing prescriptions is we're going to come up with the basic rationales and put those to a code so that it makes it easier for you and makes it easier for us. So we can develop a list of the rationales, such as those I've already mentioned, and there's a few more to come. We'll make a list of that. We'll put it into a code list, give you a master list so that you can literally call in methimazole transdermal gel for the reason of it's difficult to pill the animal. And then we can just go from there. And we're going to make it as clean and as simple as possible. That way, that rationale can be kept in the veterinarian profile, on the prescription, and also in the pharmacy profile. So let's review the invalid medical rationales. For example, the FDA will not allow us to say a compounded medication is less expensive, or the veterinarian or the patient just prefers to have the medication compounded, or we can't just cut the strength in half. However, we can manipulate it in other ways, or even just change the dosage form and flavor it. And then we would use another rationale, for example, intolerance to excipients available in a commercially available product. So moving on to bullet point number 6, if a compounded animal drug has the same active ingredients as one or more of a marketed FDA approved or indexed drug, the compounder has to determine and document the reasons why none of the commercially available products can be sourced as active ingredients. And here's some of the reasons that may be included. Sometimes an FDA approved index drug is impractical, quite honestly, because of the volume or because of the inactive ingredients that are used to make up that dosage form. Sometimes we have to make sterile products. And if the active ingredient is only available in a commercial non-sterile dosage form, that's not going to work. That's not, we don't make sterile products out of the contents of a tablet or a capsule. It's not feasible. So we have to use bulk ingredients and then process that through sterile technique, autoclaving, sterilization, other methods to then be able to provide you with the right product. If a compounded medication is ordered for a dog, but the only product contains an inactive ingredient such as xylitol, which is toxic to dogs, then we would be able to compound from a bulk ingredient. And that happens quite a bit, quite often. And we can always look at the list of inactive ingredients in the package insert. And that's something that the pharmacy will do ahead of time for you. When a compounding pharmacy receives a prescription and the only active ingredient is sold directly to veterinarians, and the pharmacy is unable to purchase that, then we might be able to either use a commercially available product or a bulk drug. Now, when we use a veterinarian product, the list of inactive ingredients may not be there. In fact, even when we've done a deep dive and we've researched with the specific manufacturers, they're not always giving us a very clean list of what those are. So we want to make sure that that is compatible with being able to compound with the bases that we use, whether it's a transdermal base or an oral liquid base. We want to make sure that those are compatible, and they're not always, but we will make sure that that takes place. So the United States Pharmacopoeia is an independent organization, and they actually have gone to some pretty extended lengths to look at compounded formulas and come up with a list of compounded formulas, starting with commercially available drugs. And what we have found, and what the USP has a list of, is a number of those formulas that have failed potency testing, as well as beyond use dating. So we will definitely use that list as a guideline. And the reason why most of the time the potency testing is failing is because when we're using a commercially available product, those are allowed to vary plus or minus 10% when we're using a generic medication. Well, as you can imagine, if we're starting with a commercially available product that's a generic manufactured medication, and the stated dose is 100 milligrams, we don't know if we're dealing with a 90 milligram capsule, a 97 milligram capsule, 103 milligram capsule, or 110 milligram capsule. It doesn't say anywhere on the batch what exactly that is, because the manufacturers are not required to evaluate that. So sometimes when we're using large quantities of capsules and we are diluting those down, we might be off in the strength. However, when we use bulk active ingredients, we can weigh those out perfectly, absolutely specific to that formula need. We're not off from that. We could also send our products out for beyond use dating and looking at potency over time, and we can verify that. And we have done that. And that is something that a lot of pharmacies have done across the United States. But when we refer to the list in the USP list, we will use this as a guideline as to whether or not to start with a commercially available product or just to dive right into the bulk ingredients. And in the pharmacy, we have standard operating procedures that are written and followed during our daily operation. And this ensures that the veterinarian patient, and the pharmacy are protected. So also in this FDA guidance, there is a new product that a new bullet point that we have to follow, which is a reporting requirement. And this is to document situations where there's an adverse event or a product defect associated with animal drug compounded from a bulk substance. The pharmacist or the veterinarian who compounded the drug has to report on a very specific form, which is available online within 15 business days of finding out about the adverse event. And this adverse event could be something that impacts the significant health of the animal. There's a wide variety of guidelines that we have to follow with that. And then those forms are completed and emailed to a specific email address. And this is what the form looks like. So the 8th bullet point referring to this FDA guidance is how the prescription is labeled. And this is really not an issue for pharmacies that are licensed in Washington State, because all of these bullet points are already on the prescription label. So that's really not a problem for us. However, I did want to bring that up because sometimes veterinarians have questions as to what are the specific areas that are required on a prescription label. And I'm happy to share this with anyone who has questions. So what does this all mean for you? Well, this guidance can affect in-office use medications. A lot of veterinarians do purchase from usually large veterinarian compounding pharmacies so that they can have bulk product in their office to use in office, or even to send a small day supply home with the patient especially when the local compounding pharmacy is not open. So for example, if you have a patient that comes in Friday evening, Maker's Compounding Pharmacy won't be open again until Monday. So perhaps you'd need to send that veterinarian patient home with a 3 or 4 days supply to tide you over. And this guidance could potentially impede that. There also needs to be, we need to take into account what's actually going on with the justification process. We don't want to slow down your workload whatsoever. So we are here to try to make that as easy as possible. And there's a potential to see an interruption in service from mail order pharmacies because of all of these bullet points set up in the guidance. So we're here to reassure you that we are doing absolutely everything we can to abide by the guidance and to make sure that we have easy solutions. And we're here to enhance the medical experience, certainly not change it. Our goal is to keep it simple, not just for you, but also for us. And so I wanted to show you a couple of examples as to why we would use a bulk active ingredient versus making a product from a commercially available capsule or tablet. So I'm going to put some of my garb on because I'm actually going to be dealing with some substances, and our pharmacy student Rachel is going to move the computer around so that you can actually watch what we're doing here. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen for just a moment. And so when we're in the compounding lab and we are compounding, we use N95 masks. So I apologize ahead of time if it's a little bit harder to hear, but we want to make sure that we are all kept safe. I also want to make sure that we are not getting our hair in anything. And of course we glove. And so these are nitrile gloves that are also chemo rated, so that we can make sure that we are protected. And of course we pull these gloves down over our ribbing on our gowns. So Rachel's going to bring this over and I'm going to show you a couple of ideas. Okay, so let's say we're going to make methimazole transdermal gel. And let's say we're going to make a 5 milligram per 0.1 ml, which is the same as a 50 milligram per mil. So what I've done, and Rachel, if you can come just a little bit closer, sorry for the jiggling. This is 50 milligrams of methimazole weighed out on a weigh paper. And as you can see, it's a very small amount. This is methimazole 5 milligram tablets, and there are 10 of them here. And so as you can see, there's a very large difference between the volume of this 50 milligrams of active ingredient and 50 milligrams of active ingredient in a commercially available product. Now, it is going to be absolutely impossible to get these tablets in 1 ml of transdermal gel. And so this is what 1 ml of transdermal gel looks like. So as you can see, it's already a little bit thick. I'm going to bring that a little bit closer so you can see that. So that is 1 ml of transdermal gel. And as you can imagine, to incorporate 50 milligrams of powder versus 10 tablets. The 50 milligrams of powder is not going to make this gel very thick, but the inactive ingredients in these tablets, along with the active ingredients, are going to make this incredibly thick and impossible to squish out of either a syringe or out of a device to help apply this to the inner ear of a cat or even of a dog, or we've even seen this done with other animals as well. So this is one of the situations when
we would be able to rely to one of the bullet points in the guidance where using an active ingredient would be absolutely applicable. So the other issue is if we are starting with bulk capsules. So if we're going to make a gabapentin 100 milligram per mil suspension, and we are starting with commercially available capsules, I've already emptied out 9 of them, so I'm going to empty out the 10th one here. As you can see, there's a lot of powder that comes out of these capsules. This is a very large capsule. This is actually an aught size. And even for a lot of adults, that's a little bit difficult to swallow. And if we were to take this and mix it with our suspending, oh, there we go, our suspending vehicle. To make 100 milligram per mil, there's, let's see. So we're going to put just 8 mils in there. And, sorry, we're going to mix this up in our mortar and pestle. We're going to wet it, make the suspension. So what I'm going to do is make a total of 40 mils. I'm going to add just a little bit more of our base. So I'm going to bring this closer. There we go. So it makes a fairly nice suspension of this. It's pretty uniform, pretty smooth. We would add flavoring to that, but this still contains lactose and sugars that may not be something that an animal should have, but it looks pretty good. Very well, very easy to put together. Now we've already made gabapentin from a bulk ingredient. So we just want to make sure that this is shaken up really, really well. Because with all suspensions, you want to make sure that it is uniformly mixed together. That way the dose is correct with every single administration. And so I'm just going to, and as you can see, that is pretty similar to what we made with the commercially available product. And the difference being is that we don't know if this is a 10% plus or minus or anywhere in between, but we do know that this is perfect, that this is exactly 100 milligram per mil. But we don't know with this because we don't know the specificity of those capsules. But that is what's stated on the bottle for the capsules, so we would assume that that is correct. So that is how we would determine whether to use an active ingredient that is commercially available or an active ingredient that would be derived from bulk. So we're going to take this back over here. We're going to finish our slideshow. So again, like I said, we want to keep this as simple as possible. We want to make sure that we continue to care for veterinary patients just as well as we have over the last 11 years for the next at least 11 years, if not beyond. However, even though this guidance is final,
It is not too late to let your legislators know exactly how you feel about this and how encumbered it could be on your patients. You can still make a difference by contacting Senator Patty Murray's office, Senator Maria Cantwell's office, or even your congressperson. And in this area, it's usually Rick Larson or Susan Delbene. And let them know just how directly this guidance completely needs to be repealed due to how it impacts your patients. I do believe that one voice can definitely make a difference. If you would like more or additional information, especially to share with your staff, we are here and available to come to your staff meetings to share this slide presentation with them and to answer any questions that may be necessary, especially for those individuals who will be calling in prescriptions, just so that they know that we're not asking for information that is outside of what is going to be federally necessary. I thank you so very much for joining us this evening. And if you have any questions, please feel free to get a hold of us. You can call us at the store, 360-757-6677. You can also email us or drop us a line from our website, which is makerscompounding.com. We would love to hear from you. Is there any questions